Hey everybody, let me know if you can hear me okay and see me okay. Yeah, we tried doing a little pre-roll because I've talked about trying to figure that out in the past, and I took a second and threw together some pre-roll images or a pre-roll image. Welcome everybody. It is the Sunday night stream. We are here to talk, as we do every week, about dwarves and world building and campaign creation. How's everybody's Sunday going so far? Mine's been pretty busy. I've been kind of running around crazy. Oh, did I close? There's my chat. Sounds good. Looks good. Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, I look forward to this stream every week. This is kind of one of the times when I get to sit down, and once I get all the technical stuff arranged and get everything figured out, I can just sit down and think about, fiction and think about the worlds that I'm making as opposed to all my other, logistics in my actual life. So this is kind of a highlight of my week, actually. And it's like the premise of it is to come and talk about this. My wife is very, very patient, and we have kind of like allotted times like we get to talk about stuff like this. But I always feel guilty. I'm like, you don't want to just talk about dwarves all day. But like this stream, that's the whole point. Is just to talk about dwarves. Yeah, so we had another extremely close poll this week to determine what exactly we were going to cover. And it came down to how to start the campaign, which I think is going to be a really interesting stream when we actually get to it. It's been like second place a couple of weeks now. And then this new one, which was Dwarven Law and Customs. So we're going to talk about that today. We have some of it already kind of world built. I think we did like a Dwarven Society stream a couple months ago. I think it was this summer. And we talked about the basics of the legal system, but I wanted to go into them a little bit more and talk about what are their specific laws, and how are they enforced and how are they interpreted, and then maybe delve a little bit into some like not laws per se, but just general customs. What are some things that the dwarves, kind of the norm versus rule sort of stuff that we learned a lot of in 2016. Yeah, so I have just some basics on the dwarven like judicial system up here. And then I put the Ten Commandments in because they're going to be kind of a touchstone. We're obviously not going to use them as they are, and I actually kind of want them there so that way we can deviate from them as much as possible. But I wanted to get like this is kind of the rubric and sort of how they're formatted, and just try to sort of remind myself what they look like and how they work. And then I've just made a list of some standard dwarven customs about marriage and about sort of parental roles. I talk a little bit about same-sex couples, the role of master and apprentice, and how inheritance works, which is a conversation I had with my wife like 2 days ago. So we'll just wait and see if a couple more people show up. Then we're gonna roll right in, and I'll just do like a brief summary of the things we've already talked about, so that way we could just kind of dive into the actual meat of it. Dwarf Moses, yeah, we'll talk about that. I think like that's funny because that's one of those like similarities again between dwarves and Judaism, which I'm not necessarily trying to do, but I think it's the idea was more of like and we'll talk about this, but like a dwarven that they're so rigid. I liked the idea that whatever legal system they had come up with, basically in their biblical past, like imagine if we still used Deuteronomy as like a legal as like the Constitution or whatever right now, right? This ancient document that was written for a civilization thousands of years ago, but that they still use and they haven't changed, and there's been no translations of it, and it is what it is, and their whole society is based off of that because they're dwarves, right? They're completely rigid and unmoving, and that's the idea, is that what their culture, those are their cultural values, is endurance and withstanding and like crafting one thing that works forever. But can they actually do that, and what kind of society kind of spins out as a result of that, right? How much do they push up against this idea of having to follow these laws that were written however long ago? I mean, honestly, it's a little bit like the Second Amendment, right? Where it's this law that was written to fit into a society that has since been completely modernized and outdated the law, but there are people who still hold on to it and say this is still, relevant to my everyday life, and I like that conflict of this ancient way of thinking that's carried on into the present. And is that a good idea? And like maybe in some places it helps them, maybe in some places it hurts them. I don't want it to be just a binary black or white. So that was kind of the idea, right? Was to construct a legal system that worked for a previous age. Yeah, let's talk about it. So the way that it works right now, what we have established so far, what we know about the legal system as it currently stands, is that there is this epic poem that the dwarves write. That's basically their history. It's essentially their Bible. It's essentially like this big, huge document that has existed since, sort of their prehistory, and it is essentially an epic poem. It's meant to be recounted at the forge, so it's sort of like recited to this, boom, boom, boom hammer rhythm. When it's recited in like halls and things, I feel like there's a lot of banging of tankards or banging the table to get that rhythm. And it basically recounts from their mythic origins the entire history of the dwarven people. And so it's tens of thousands of verses long, and like nobody knows the whole thing. And every year they add on a couple more verses or whatever to sort of recap what has happened in the past. It's a little bit, Ramayana in there, and it's a little bit Bible in there, and it's a little bit American Pie in there, like this extremely long song. And it has the same melody, and you just sing it over and over and over again, and you can like punch in whatever lyrics you need to, right? It's the same rhythm, the same meter. And that's basically the only piece of like literature that the dwarves really have. Like they have stories and memories and things, but they don't really write down in the same way that, elves do, who are very, very literate and have this huge catalog and folios of plays and works and novels and things. Dwarves don't have that. Dwarves have the one, because they're not really concerned about fiction. They don't care about fiction. The idea of it confuses them, right? They only care about history and what actually happened. Which is funny because they're so imaginative, right? But not in that way, not for people, just for things and ideas and creations. So anyway, there's like an early, again, if you're making the Bible comparison, right? Like the beginning of this poem is all about the creation of the earth and, the 6 gods and their sort of trials and tribulations and the capturing of Yog, although they don't call it that. And the creation of the world and the establishment of dwarven society and all this stuff. And in that early section, that's all about the establishment of dwarven society, there's a couple of verses, maybe like 10 or 12 verses, that are basically the laws of dwarven society, right? These are the things that govern success or failure, right? Oh, my wife texted me. That's cute. These are, the laws by which the dwarven society is kind of designed around. The Tome of Stone is cool. Hey, what's up, Shadowrunner? Yeah, we are talking about Moses. How you doing, Alan? Yeah, we're talking about the Ten Commandments a little bit. We're talking about how the dwarven laws came into being. So anyway, I like the idea that there were 10 or 12 of these verses, right, that were the most important, again, kind of like the Bill of Rights almost a little bit in there. Daddy tablets. He came back from Daddy with some tablets. Daddy tablets sounds like a brand of like vitamin that you would have to give your kids. Like, have you had your Daddy tablets today? So the idea was that there were 10 or 12 of these verses that were carved into the epic poem. And as it was Alan's idea last week, we were talking about fantastic locations, that all of those verses are chiseled into the walls of the Great Dwarven Library that was built by Kavmora False Silver, the third queen of Coom, or the third ruler of Coom, the second queen of Coom. And that, they basically, if you're making the Bible comparison, that this is Deuteronomy, right? This is the section of the Bible, or of the poem, that talks about social mores and specifically laws. So I don't know exactly how this happened, but we were talking about so who arbitrates this stuff and who makes these decisions and who rules over cases. And way back in the day when we first had this conversation, we toyed around with the idea of it being a more traditional law system, where people are appointed, or there's prophecy involved as to the seventh son of the seventh son, because the number 7 is important to dwarves, obviously. And we ended up with kind of a big, weird, magical solution that I thought was kind of interesting, that I liked the most. So the idea was basically that there were, at some point in their history, maybe in their mythic history, there were these 7 judges, maybe they were 7 thanes of the different clans or whatever, who all made a pact to basically serve the dwarven law, to serve the Tome of Stone, or the words in stone, right? And they made this pact, and the oaths are really binding for dwarves, right? And so the notion is that they basically became revenants after a sense. I see them as more like a death knight or something like that. Basically, an undead spirit that is bound into a suit of armor. And they rule over the dwarves, but only in a judicial sense. So they like live in their barrow. Again, think kind of like Paths of the Dead sort of a situation. And whenever a law is broken anywhere in Coombe, one of these judges will sort of like apparate or appear and will sort of go forth and go to the site, and they will preside over the case. They do an investigation. I like the idea that investigation is a little bit not particularly scientific, right? Whenever there's a disputed claim, and then they will reach a verdict because the judge is undead and infallible, and then the punishment is therefore rendered. We talked about how the punishment could take many forms. It was somebody's idea that whoever the aggrieved party is always has some hand in determining the exact nature of the punishment, but it tends to be they don't really believe in I don't think they believe in capital punishment. I don't think they believe in the death penalty or sort of Game of Thrones style beheading. I think maybe for some crimes, like really heinous crimes, but I like the idea that the punishment is usually hard labor, and specifically hard labor that like does not benefit the clan or does not do anything. You might get like sentenced, for a certain amount of time to do like labor for another clan, potentially like the clan you wronged or a rival clan. But the standard punishment, I think, is like, breaking rocks or like almost Sisyphean style tasks that are like completely pointless. And the idea is that the dwarves' labor is the most valuable thing that they have. And so they kind of waste it, right? They throw it in the garbage, and it's meant for you to think about like what you could have been doing with this time. Instead, you're doing this labor. So maybe there's some imprisonment in there too, but I think the main thing they harp on is like labor that serves no purpose and helps no one, right? But then kind of interestingly, if the accused disputes the claim, the idea is that they can elect to sort of, again, Game of Thrones style, go into a trial by combat. And the thought here is that that's less of an actual combat, like you don't fight back against the judge, but the judge has, of course, a huge hammer, right, a giant gavel. And the accused is given a shield, and if they can survive like 7 strikes from the judge's hammer, then they are deemed innocent in the eyes of the gods. Understandably, this almost never happens. Most of the time, the judge is able to shatter the shield. It's believed the hammers are, magical or righteous in some way, that kind of a thing. But I like the idea of there being a trial by combat worked in because it feels very medieval and it gives you some cool dramatic stakes of, ways to get out of problems. But I didn't want it to, it didn't make sense to me that the dwarves would just value combat, right? They don't care about force of arms necessarily. They care about defense and armor and withstanding, like assault. And so if you can stand and you can hold your ground, then your purpose must be righteous. So that's basically like the nuts and bolts of how we talk about the justice system. I like that it's supernatural. I like that it's ostensibly like infallible. And I like that the dwarven judges don't, they're not good and they're not evil. They're strictly neutral. They're lawful neutral. They just interpret the words in stone or the tome of stone, whatever we end up calling the law. That's all they care about. They just look at the situation, look at the facts, and compare it, and then they make a judgment call. What's interesting about this, and kind of harkening back to the Bible, and specifically like the Talmud, I like the idea that like because the laws are so primal and they're so sort of ancient and almost antediluvian, right? They're very like inflexible, and they again applied to a time thousands of years ago before humans were in Coombe, before there was gunpowder, before a bunch of the new developments the dwarves have made. That there is a certain degree of like interpretation that a lot of like, I don't know if dwarves have lawyers per se, because if you have these judges, do you really need lawyers? We can talk about that. Maybe, well, what is the role of justice in the everyday dwarven society? But like the idea that it's a lot about interpreting. So, kind of the thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife versus, thou shalt not commit adultery. Like, why are these two different laws? And what is the subtle distinction between them? And it's a lot of like debate and theology about why were these things chosen and who wrote the laws exactly, and are they divinely inspired? And all that stuff. I think there's a lot of room for the dwarves to then say, if these are the laws, again, going back to like the Second Amendment, like the way we talk about like bear arms and what do they refer to, what were the founders referring to when they talked about arms, and what were they talking about the well-regulated militia. Oh, like the perfect example in the Bill of Rights, I think it's the Third Amendment. I could be wrong. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the one about quartering soldiers, right? Where like that was a big concern in 1776. When they were, I don't know exactly when they wrote the Bill of Rights, much later, I'm sure. But like that was a big concern, when the country was founded. But now it's absurd. The idea of the U.S. government quartering soldiers in your house is silly. I mean, it hasn't been a concern for hundreds of years. But that's exactly the kind of law I'm talking about, where the dwarves still have those laws on the book. So I like the idea, once we get into it, that there are some of these laws that just don't make sense anymore, and they're still there, and they almost never come up. That feels very true to life for me. Okay, last little thing. I've been talking a lot, and then we'll try to open this up let's start to brainstorm. A, the words in stone specifically, and like B, what other ways, what are some other problems or legal ramifications? Like, are there lawyers, and like how does the dwarven society think about that? How does the punishment work exactly? Like that kind of stuff. Let's start brainstorming some of those. I wanted to briefly talk about dwarven customs and get into these. So I just put down 4.5. And these are mostly things we've talked about before, but just to review, because they might come up. We talked about marriage. Again, so these are customs. These are like norms, but not laws. And they're kind of meant to be broken in that way, right? Like they're there so that way you can have characters who deviate from those norms. So this is by no means set in stone. Laws of honor, pride. Chatowner says, laws of honor, pride, commerce, family, warfare, etc. Each type of law has its own trial that the accursed must overcome or be subject to the appropriate ordeal of punishment. Ooh, I like that idea of like tying different punishments to the nature of the crime. That's really cool. I love that. So let's talk about the customs really quick, and then let's get into some of that shit, Shadow. That's awesome. Maybe each one is like, because there don't have to be 10 commandments, right? There could be however many we decide. It could be 5, it could be 20, I don't know. But maybe each one of the like categories or whatever has, because it's something kind of cool about the laws being really vague. Like for example, he says honor. If there's some dwarven law about, like it's something super vague, like retain thy honor or something like that. And again, we'll talk about how they're worded, but then there's all these different interpretations. This person sullied my honor. I was unable to retain my honor, and therefore they're the criminal. Like almost the vaguer they are, the more interesting it gets to be, and the more interpretations there can be for the different laws. Let's talk about customs really quick, but that's awesome. So marriage, we talked about briefly, that dwarven marriage is different from human marriage in a lot of ways, and especially elven marriage. Dwarves don't really marry for love. Love, like romantic love, is a concept that's essentially foreign to them, at least, again. Now when I say this, I'm talking about sort of Coomish society, like the original dwarven society. Or if you commit a dishonorable act, yes, that's true, Shadow. But enough time has passed since the dwarves were exiled from Coom that most dwarves who live in the world now have integrated with humans, and a lot of human culture has crept in. We're talking about like traditional, old school dwarven culture. So again, norms, not laws. But traditionally, dwarves don't marry for love. They don't view romantic love as a prime virtue. It's nice, I guess, if you have it, but it's not important. Again, kind of think of the medieval idea of love, where it's about position, and it's about and specifically for dwarves, it's about collaboration and artistry. Dwarves marry to find a partner, someone that they can work with, and to a dwarf, sex and like romance is not as important as collaboration. Not that dwarves couldn't maybe collaborate with someone that they're not married to, but that's seen as a bigger and scarier thing than, having sex outside of wedlock or whatever. Now, a successful dwarven marriage is one that results in greater creations, not everlasting love. Matchmakers then feature prominently in dwarven society. So it's all about, if you are a good mason, then, you might marry the silversmith, and the two of you could make, incredible statues or whatever together. Mother and father is a big role. Once again, dwarven parental roles are unique to their race. Mirroring their creation myth, Ignon is the mother of Lodes, and she is basically the earth. She sacrificed herself to make the earth, and so, the idea is that the mother is sort of the 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 one who physically brings forth the treasure. Like that she bears the child within her in the way that the earth bears precious stones and metals and things that the dwarves value. But then the father's job as Umbor, the Forge Father, is to take that metal once it's been delivered, right? Once it's been found, and then shape it. So the mother physically gives birth to the child, but then the father raises the child up to a certain point, usually around the age of 25. That also kind of somewhat addresses the idea of like same-sex couples, that it's the role of mother and father is not necessarily can kind of be played by members of either gender, right? It doesn't really matter. So there's a lot of room for sort of transgender dwarves then in that case, where it's more about assuming the role, in society than it is about like your actual biology. In same-sex couples, then I had the idea that like I think we talked about this, that like clerics of Umbor or Ignon can often serve as surrogates as necessary in order to bear the child. Perhaps coincidentally, many children born this way are drawn to the clergy. And I like the idea too that like if they are born via the surrogate method, it's kind of like, is it just chance that the child was drawn to the clergy? Did something happen? You know what I mean? Like I like that idea, that it's this subtle. The priests in dwarven society have kind of a sly sort of an underpinning thematically, so I kind of like that. However, the most important relationship in dwarven society is between master and apprentice. While the father raises the children in their chosen field, usually for the first 25 years, during a child's proving, when they make some masterwork to sort of show off to the other masters to try to like entice them to pick them up, they can be apprenticed to any master who makes an offer. So even if your father was, let's say, a stone carver and you want to be a silversmith, you could carve something, carve a stone teapot or something like that to show like, look, I can make things, this is what my interest is. And a silversmith master might come along and say, oh, look at this. This is obviously telegraphed to me saying that you want to be a silversmith, incredible craftsperson, come work with me, right? It's pretty common that dwarves end up working with being apprenticed to their parents or their fathers, but they can be apprenticed to anyone who offers, any master who makes an offer. So there's a lot of drama then there, right? That like the father will traditionally make the last offer on the proving day, but if the child accepts somebody else, then you could get into a sort of a family drama scenario. And then lastly, this is one thing we haven't talked about on the stream yet, inheritance. Similarly, kind of rarely follows bloodline, and instead tends to transfer from master to apprentice. Once a dwarf reaches a certain age, they commit themselves to sort of one final masterwork. They're ready for their retirement. If you're a silversmith, I'm going to create this statue or whatever, totally out of silver. And so they begin to give away all their possessions that they no longer require to make this masterwork. And usually they'll give it to their apprentice. They may give some, obviously, to their spouse or to their children or to their apprentice's family or whatever. And then then the dwarf usually goes off and works on the masterwork. Once the masterwork is finished, the dwarf almost immediately thereafter dies. And that's the idea, right? That they dedicate themselves to one last thing. And when that last thing is complete, they die. So you do end up in scenarios there where you have dwarves who it takes for whatever reason get delayed, or they take too long to finish their masterwork, and they just continue to live until the masterwork is done. So I think that's a pretty good primer. We can get into some of these topics and dig around. But let's maybe talk about laws. Thanks for your patience, everybody. We're getting to this point of the campaign where a lot of the stuff has been pretty well developed, and we're kind of filling in loose pockets. So I feel like lately it's been a lot of me just talking on the stream. I would love to do one relatively soon that's like a totally open field and just start throwing suggestions. Like, I haven't thought about blank at all. Let's talk about it. Elves might be that, actually. I have like a line of, I think they should do this. This is kind of the tone, and the rest of it's open. Maybe the elves one will be a good one to just totally open the forum. So let's talk about these laws. Let me get in here finally. Okay, so we'll leave the words in stone here, I think, once we actually get ready to start writing some of these laws, or at least drafting the concepts, then we can deal with it. You do keep voting elves, Brooke. I think we're going to try to make that happen for you next week. Alan says sub-judge justice system. The role of priests could be as local judges for civil disputes that can't be settled, or if the case is especially significant, the priest might try to call in a judge. Yeah, I think that's cool. I think you could do that. The priests have a slightly different role, but they could be because of their neutrality, that could work. Short primer. The idea of a priest is that they basically give up their clan. They lose their clan name and they walk around, and depending on which god they're devoted to, they perform different services. So a priest to Kavish would, help bless wine, help with ceremonies and plan parties and stuff. A priest of Ignon can help find precious metals, things like that. I think that's cool. I think that could work. I did want to say this idea that, like, yes, there are only 7 judges, and that's definitely true. I like the idea that A, there's a fog of war effect, and B, that, like, maybe there's implications that, like, sometimes the same judge has been seen at the same place, right? That, like, you don't really know how they work. There's just something mystical about it that they just show up. I definitely think, like, disputes can be, like, mitigated in the short term. And I think a lot of times, maybe it's priests could be neutral. I think a lot of times it's just the Thane, kind of like a king or a lord, who makes a decision about something if there's a dispute. What I like, too, is the notion that the judge, it's the breaking of the law that triggers the judge. It's not like you summon a judge. The judge just shows up. So sometimes I wonder if you get scenarios where, let's say someone has stolen something, right? And assuming that theft is one of the words in stone, which I assume it will be. Let's say someone has stolen something in a hold, right? But nobody knows. They haven't caught the thief, or the theft hasn't even been noticed. And then the judge shows up, right? And is basically just like, this law has been broken. And then it becomes this moment of, like, who broke a law? Like, they don't understand. It isn't immediately clear. It's not like a huge alarm bell goes off. You don't summon the judge. The judge just shows up. But I think they might take time. I don't know if it's like it's not instantaneous, because they have to physically walk right there, or glide, or do whatever. So it takes time to get there. But I like that they just arrive. Or maybe it's like it's always 3 days. Whatever. If the judge shows up, the crime was committed 3 days ago, right? Because, yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense that they, logistically speaking, if there are 7 judges, they couldn't possibly handle all the cases, but they're magic, right? They're ghosts. So I think it's okay if we break some of the rules as to what's physically possible. The living judges are usually the high warden, king, or lords, respond to lesser crimes. Yeah, I could see that. The Deep Roads is very Dragon Age. I do think that, like, whoever the person in charge is would make a small ruling on, like, a dispute, especially if there is no clear legal precedent. If it's like 2 people both lay claim to a certain area or a certain whatever, right? Like, they wouldn't by necessity have to. So maybe the laws need to be written in such a way where they don't trigger all the time. Yeah, let's talk about that. So I'm just going to add a new dot in here. Other ideas. Priests could serve as mediators for small disputes, ones that go beneath the supernatural notice of the judges. I just love the idea. I can see that in the campaign so clearly. Like a little way into the game, the party's doing what they're doing, and suddenly the judge shows up, right, and says one of the laws has been broken. And it's almost as much about, like, figuring out why the judge is here or who they're after at the same time that the judge is. And, like, the judge maybe doesn't have all the information. Maybe it's like a precog thing. Like, they see some of what they need. They know some names, or they know which law was broken, and they begin to investigate, right? So it's kind of like a race. Like, can we figure out what happened, what triggered the judge before the judge does? What if it's one of us? What if we unwittingly broke one of these laws? Thanes and kings. We'll say thanes and monarchs. Typically dispense small justices and rulings, but for anything major, the judge appears. There's something supernatural about how the judges arrive and are summoned. they somehow know whenever a law is broken and arrive within 3 days of the violation. It's often a mystery to the Dwarven clan why the judge has selected them. And especially if some of these things are like, again, this is just an example, but like imagine if one of the words in stone is like, do not covet thy neighbor's wife, right? It's something like that. It's like, it's almost like a thought police thing, right? Like, don't have desires that are, impure. If there is one like that, I'm not saying there will be, but let's just entertain it. What I love about that is that, like, a judge could show up, right? It's like you just thought something, and if someone is, maybe one of them is, don't be greedy or don't be jealous, and then the judge just shows up, and it's like you were too. That's okay. You were too jealous, and now I'm here, and now you have to answer for your jealousy, right? The bell's cool. Yeah, dude, that's totally right, Alan. That's exactly what it is. It's like in a video game where you've accrued too much like threat level, right? The heat is too high, and then that's when like the real fucking dudes come out after you. Totally. I was thinking of Black Flag has that, where like you can get like bounty privateers that come after you. That's a perfect analogy. Arrival of judges is announced by some kind of bell. Bell or gong or horn. It's cool. Hey, Jose, thanks for coming. Oh, dude, it's okay. I voted for elves. A couple people did, but not that many. We're going to figure the elves thing out. Don't you worry about it. Okay. I think that's cool. So, let's see. I think it was Shadow who had this idea. The words in stone fall into different categories. Honor, family, creation, property, blah, blah, blah. Punishments are doled out depending on which category the laws are. Again, this is the thing. What I wanted to do here is I wanted to create like a legal system that could only exist in a fantasy world, and I like the uncomfortable tension it creates between these very human, fallible people and this very inhuman, almost like robotic or like artificial intelligence, like legal system. Right? Imagine if the government basically outsourced the law, right, to like a computer algorithm, and it just said like, if any of these things happen, like if any of these conditions are met, then you're under arrest or whatever it is, right? And there's not, you can't really reason with it. It just makes a decision. Again, it's like precog, right? It's like this is what you did, and that's illegal, and so there you go, you're effed. And so there is kind of room for like, oh, I did not know that. Jose, it's Timothy, Jose. You love, damn. Alan says, yeah, threshold too high, seek and detain. There you go. If a human commits a crime in a dwarven hold, will a judge come after them? Ooh, if a dwarf commits a crime out of the human world, they provoke a judge's attention. That's fascinating. So the judges are definitely only limited to Coom, so they can't go past a certain geographical border. But I don't know about humans. That's a great question. Okay, let's write that down. Humans, dwarves. I definitely think my true name. Do you know the legend of the Screaming? I do not know the legend of the Screaming Rock. Screaming Stone when a judge arrives. Tell me about the legend of the Screaming Rock. I don't know that very much. But that, again, it's the idea of a completely inhuman, unsympathetic justice system, right? The one that like it just interprets, it just pursues and enforces the law. It is not going to listen to your human pleas for mercy. So, okay, thinking about the humans thing. Humans, dwarves, humans. I think only dwarves are subject to the law, to the judges. And I think that might be a good reason to have secondary legal authority, right? Like a priest or a thane, to punish humans or to make decisions about that. Thanes and kings or monarchs are all about foreign policy. They're all about how does the hold interact with the rest of the world, whereas the peer councils are all about how does the hold interact with itself. It's all about, like, its projects and its resources and stuff like that. But the thane and the monarch are very much about like it's very like a president in the United States, right? It's all about foreign policy. You think anyone within the dwarven realm should be judged with dwarven law? I think that's true. I mean, I do think that, like, only dwarves are subject to the judges, but I think that, like, let's say a human. Ooh, that's pretty good. A conspiracy of dwarves who hire out a human to do the sin they're scheming on would be the perfect crime. Yeah, man. So here's the deal. Those guys exist. Bright Shards. Clan Bright Shard is a clan that's deeply connected to the human merchants that dwell in Coombe. They maybe, I love that. Did they use... what's going on? In Coombe, they use human agents to circumvent judges, or like judicial authority. So I think, again, Jose, I definitely agree that anyone inside the dwarven realm should fall within dwarven law. Though any dwarf could claim the human's punishment to be commuted, then to be thrown out. So I think that, like, I think they are still subject to the law. So let's say you're in a position where, like, very, very basic shit, right? So a human sneaks into a dwarven hold and steals a piece of treasure. The judge does not appear. Because I think one of the things we should talk about in the Lords of Stone is that, like, it is your job to protect your stuff. I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I like the idea that the Words in Stone does not punish the thief in some sense, or that it, like, the onus is placed upon the person who has the thing. One of the myths in their religion is about Umbor, who creates something and can't protect it, and Hemdall, the god of thieves, who keeps taking it. And the myth is about Umbor learning how to protect his stuff, not about Hemdall being bad for stealing. So I wonder if there's a way to play with that, and we'll get to that in a second. But if a human were to sneak in and do something bad, a human sneaks in and kills a dwarf, and then leaves. Or not leaves, but is trying to escape and gets caught. No judge will appear. But I think the Thane can still make a ruling. I think the king or the lord or whoever can still punish them because they are sort of acting as the will of the judge in that case, right? Like, they like the Thane won't supernaturally know the answer in the way that a judge can, right? Or, like, I feel like the judge has, like, detect alignment shit, and the judge has, like, zone of truth and, like, things like that. The judge has, like, supernatural powers to solve cases. But I don't think that, obviously, Thanes and people don't. Like, they're just regular dwarves. Oh, interesting. Does a judge show up when the mundane legal system fails to uphold the law? I mean, I think it depends, because if it applies to humans, then no. They don't care about humans, right? They only care about dwarves, is my current theory. I think that, like, if it's a dwarf situation, if a dwarf is involved, right, then definitely. I mean, maybe there's an interesting thing where, like, if a Thane makes a ruling on something and they rule incorrectly, then yeah, I think a judge would show up, but they would show up for the Thane, right? Like, you broke the law by doing this. Again, a lot of this is going to depend on what these laws are, right? Because that will determine, like, how broad are they, how specific are they. I do like the idea that, like, the judges can kind of work as an IA, like an internal affairs, that, like, if there are Thanes acting, yeah, right, there you go. Judge takes 3 days anyway, time for locals to find out and get things in motion. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it may be a situation where, like, if someone is caught doing something very obvious, like, again, assuming thou shalt not murder is one of them or something like that. If someone is just, like, openly killed, right, in the middle of court, and it's very obvious the Thane can absolutely like seize him. He killed this person, right? If there's like no question of their guilt, they can be held until the judge arrives, and then it's like we expect the judge to show up. Oh, and then you get like fascinating stuff where it's like this guy obviously commits a crime, and they hold and wait for the judge, and for some reason the judge never appears. And the question is like, the judge obviously didn't get detained. I mean, maybe there's a plot like that, like the judges just stop appearing, but maybe the guy was like right for some reason in killing him, and then it becomes about, wait, why didn't the judges show up? Right? Like maybe you go and you petition them and you say, this guy murdered somebody else, like what's the deal? And the judges, do they tell you? I don't think they have to. They didn't know law was broken, right? That's really fascinating too. These are just cool hooks, right? I think Alan's idea about maybe it's honor killing, who knows? We'll have to talk about it. About the humans who are like basically stooges. The presence or absence of a judge is admissible for the accused to appeal. Absolutely, the judge never arrived. It's supposed to be the stone where either when the true king is rightfully coronated will roar, won't even sit or stand, or roar if the wrongful kings. Oh, that's cool. So basically the idea is that like each hold would have some kind of a thing, like maybe a bell or a stone or whatever that would make some noise when the judge appears. I definitely think that's cool. The other thing I will say is that like, I think there's also something cool about the judge just appearing. Hey, what's up, Fawn? Thanks for coming. Here he is, the roaring stone. I think there is something kind of cool about the judge just like ghosting in, I think that's neat. So I don't know, it's cool. I'll write it down. I think it's a good idea. But I'm not sure which one is better. Do we have the bell? Yeah. Think Screaming Stone. Does every hold have one? Okay. Oh, impersonating a judge. These are so good. Okay, adventure hooks. Let me write some of these down. The obvious one, the party is going about their business and a judge shows up. What's the deal? What crime did they commit? That's the obvious one. And that's one that like I think you just like hold in reserve and you wait, helicopter judges, and you wait for a PC to accidentally break a law and then the judge shows up. I don't think that's one you plan. You just like kind of wait and say, oops, you did this. One of them is dwarves, Clan Brightshard. Hire humans or other races to commit crimes in Coombe under the radar. Because that's another example, I think, of like, so maybe there's something that's in the wording of the laws, like no dwarf shall, right? That it's a legalistic thing. It's not that like the judges wouldn't pursue humans, but like it's no man shall this and no man shall that. Like it's specifically using the word dwarf, and that's why it only applies to dwarves, because of like a wording technicality, and like there's maybe an argument made that wasn't what the founders or whatever intended, because at that time they didn't know there were other races. There were like goblins and giants and stuff, but these aren't rules for goblins or giants. They didn't realize humans even existed in the world yet. So all the laws are written as no dwarf shall, and like, yeah, a modern society, an enlightened society would update those laws to say no one shall. But that's not what we're talking about here. These are dwarves, and if the rules were written back then they still work that way. What did you do? That's very funny. Yeah, exactly. The quest is framed as a retrieval, because they work with miners and stuff. Yeah, totally. And they're very manipulative, so that's cool. We had two other ones. We had a crime is committed. It's committed in broad daylight. The accused, or the guilty party, because they're guilty, right, is apprehended. And then 3 days later, no judge arrives. Why? A false judge appears and condemns an innocent dwarf. Yeah, these are all great, by the way. I could do a whole campaign just like Judge Judy, but with dwarves. Um, okay. Guilty until proven innocent. Yeah, basically. Um, so let's talk about these words. I like if we're going to go with only human or only dwarves are affected by. I like the idea of a repetition of no dwarf shall. So let's talk wording for a second. I would totally watch that too. God, imagine the warhammer that she would have to bang, bang, bang. Are you looking at Leviticus and Deuteronomy, Alan? That's awesome. Is it Leviticus is the one that's laws? I always thought it was Deuteronomy. I don't know my Bible very well. Very specific about organs. I don't think the I think the this is I think the dwarves are the opposite of that. Where like they're all about the fiddly stuff. I think this is like laws about dwarven society. I do think that there's like I do think that there's like 600 verses or something about measurements in stone and weights. I think a lot of their like core knowledge of how to like build stuff is encoded into the epic poem. Um, and it's like the part everybody skips. Like everybody knows that stuff. It's like important to study when you're like an engineer or you're learning to build, right? But it's like I think all the rules for how to forge are in there. I think there's all kinds of stuff. Like the whole like first half of the epic poem, I think, is like, idiot's guide to being a dwarf. One less frowning. Yeah, that like a dwarven smile is like a neutral expression. Um, yeah, exactly. Right. All their standards are all part of the epic poem. I think that's cool that like these are the ancient secrets that they can't let be forgotten. That's the most important thing to them. I think that comes like almost first, you know. I wonder if it comes before the. No, I think the holy stuff is first, like the creation of. It's like Genesis, and then I think it's measurements and weights and stuff, and then I think it's laws. I think it comes before the laws for dwarven society because they needed it first. Yeah, Zone of Truth is in there. We talk. Oh yes, that's a good idea. Let me put that in. Judges have supernatural power, like detective or deductive powers. They can innately locate guilty creatures. They can find objects associated with the case. No one can lie within a certain radius of them. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's that kind of stuff. They do not, when they arrive, have a full picture of the case and must question witnesses to glean the truth. Would the town's fool in dwarven society be one who is dyslexic? Oh yeah, maybe. That's interesting. Dyslexia among dwarves. Okay. So I want to talk about wording. So when we come up with these laws, we're going to have to be careful because I do want to write some verses of this epic poem. So we're not going to be using specific wording here probably because I don't want to try to like write. I haven't figured out the meter or the melody of the song yet. When we do the podcast, I would love to get a composer because I feel like it would be cool to write the theme, write the melody, and then compose and like commission different pieces of music using that same melody for different things. So like the combat music would have the same melody but would be kind of intense, and then the sort of like mystery music would use the same melody but be kind of mysterious. But I would love to figure out to do that. I'm going to need to figure out like the rhythm, and it's going to depend on the song. So we're not going to write the specific wording. We might use like little bits. I do like the no dwarf shall and stuff like that. That's cool. Yeah, the law might be like the gold. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I think the first entries are probably mythological in some way, just to say like the world was made and blah 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 blah. But it might be interesting if even that is done in kind of a mathematical or engineering way, that like they talk about how the earth was made. But I do think there's like a long bit about they care. It shows you what they care about. They care about the engineering and they care about the techniques more than they care about the laws in the society. That's secondary to what they build and what they make. That's the first thing they care about. So what are some examples? Let's get into it. What are some examples of laws in dwarven society? I suppose there's one more thing we should maybe quick talk about before we get into that, and that's dwarven vices and virtues, which is actually pretty important for this. So let me pull that up. I won't be able to put it on this window, but I can read them to you. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I get the Fibonacci sequence in there. I'm going to have to, I really want that to be cool because it's going to be really pivotal to the music and to the campaign. It's got to work. Like, I'm imagining, you want something that has, like, a good, like, haunting kind of a melody. Like, the 2 tracks that I play a lot when I work on the campaign are both by, boy, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Italian. Let me look it up. Clavmani de Profundis, or it's in Latin, and they do interpretations of Tolkien's work, and so they do like an extended version of Howard Shore's Dwarven Song of Old Wealth, or Misty Mountains Cold, or Over the Misty Mountains, and they also do a Song of Durin, which is the song that Gimli sings or chants in Moria in Fellowship, and I want that kind of big, epic, like it would have to be a song that could fill a hall, with its resonance. So it's something I don't want to put a lot of pressure on yet because I want to get it just right. But anyway, let's talk about virtues and vices. Oh, I actually think I do have it in this document. I think I just got to scroll up. 4/4, full percussion-based, major keys, unless it's the ancient parts talking about gods. Oh, it can change keys? Yes, Shadow, the one from The Hobbit. Yep. Can you guys see that stuff? Yeah, great. So, things that dwarves care about. Get out of here. Things that dwarves care about, I think I have 4 prime virtues: creation, defense, history, and family are the 4 things they care about above all else. And they're basically in the correct order. Family might be a little bit more important than the bottom, but creation, defense, history, family. And history includes kind of like memory and tradition, things like that. Just go through it real quick. All dwarves create. They seek perfection, strives ever to perfect their creation, and will often scrap work entirely to start again from scratch. Criticism and critique are vital elements of dwarven culture. Dwarves protect themselves. They raise fortifications. They also care about secrecy, right? The old axiom of dwarves are invisible when closed holds true. Better guard their treasures. Dwarves are a private and secretive people. Short and stalwart of body. They're also inflexible of mind, right? So they're about hardening their thinking as well. They endure. The longest-lived races in Undune. They're obsessed with their own history and traditions. All dwarven poetry is pure history. Alcohol holds a special place for them. Rather than making them forget, alcohol makes them remember, right? And then family is important to them. The clan is the primary unit. Romantic love is unheard of in their society. Children in dwarven society are seen as the most precious creation of all. And then vices. I think we only have 3 vices listed. But they despise. And vices are interesting because it's things they're supposed to shun and hate, but it's things that they are prone to fall into. So, of course, if they're all about collection of wealth, greed is a big one, right? It's insidious, and, the idea is that you're supposed to spend your wealth to better the clan, but, all dwarves kind of fall into the trap of hoarding a little bit of gold for themselves because they know how to use it better than anyone else. Suspicion plays into that. They don't trust anyone. Ideally, they're supposed to mistrust everyone outside the clan and trust the clan, but that's very rarely ever the case. A dwarf is thoroughly suspicious all the way to his core. It's often those he knows best that he trusts the least in a lot of cases. They fear the theft of their treasure, yes, but they more darker and more insidiously they fear plagiarism. People stealing their ideas, which they can't because they can't protect against that. They can't show off their work without the threat of someone being inspired by it or stealing or outright stealing it. And then trade. This is more of a cultural thing and less of a prime virtue. But dwarves consider wealth gotten through trade to be dirty wealth or like cheap wealth, whereas wealth gotten from the earth is true wealth or pure wealth. But obviously trade is super important to dwarven society. They can't exist without it, but it's looked down upon. It's sort of seen as being a low form of wealth. So 4 virtues: creation, defense, history, family. 4 vices: greed, suspicion, and trade. So there's maybe a way to one instinct that I have, obviously because 7 is so important, that they would find some way to uh, that each there's like one law per vice and one law per virtue or whatever, right? That there's 7 laws and there's 7 virtues and vices. You could do something like that, and that keeps them relatively broad. Okay, let me see. Yes, I do want that Duel of the Fates sound. Judges should embody all 4 virtues. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they do embody that. I think the judges kind of stand outside of it. I think like the Thane is supposed to embody all those virtues, but yeah, I think the judges are outside the system. Oh, that's interesting though. The whetstones. Patent law might be a big part of the duties of a judge. Yeah, definitely it would be about copyright and things like that. Paying more attention to one another's work than your own is a sin. Safeguard against fanboyism and plagiarism. Keep a dwarf on task. Yeah. It's kind of covet thy neighbor's stuff, right? Okay, let's start writing some law ideas down. Thanks, Alan, for getting us on task. So let's just do a list of ideas, and then I can worry about the specific wording on my own time. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, to the work of others. And I like it being like simple like that. Keeps a dwarf. And I like your note that it like keeps them from being like too sycophantic to someone else. Like focus on your own stuff. Don't worry about other people. Both from plagiarism, jealousy. Yeah, no dwarf shall covet the work of another. That's cool. Etc. No dwarf shall covet the work of another. To work the work of another. Covet's cool too because it hits that 10 Commandments thing. We got a lot of chat's blowing up right now. Family is the building block of dwarf society versus murder that reduces society, deprives of the works of that individual. So like murder seems like it should be one. To harm a dwarf is to harm your own family. That's cool. To harm a dwarf is to harm the clan. Your clan. But so one thing I will say is that like the dwarves don't lie. Don't bear false witness. The thing is, I don't want to just copy. Oh, as much as we can, I would love to avoid just out and out copying the 10 Commandments. Like, I think it would be cool if we have like dwarven twists on some of the obvious ones. So here's the deal with murder. Like, obviously, murder is illegal and bad. Like, that's not a question. But I think again with like a dwarven twist, what's the idea here? So there's a couple of conflicting ideas inside dwarven thinking about murder and war. So one pillar of dwarven society is defense, and it's about the outside and the inside, and it's about the notion of like everyone inside is valuable and cherished, everyone outside is dangerous, including other dwarves, right? That like you are not supposed to let other dwarves in. You are not supposed to trust other dwarves outside the clan. So I think, like, the law should be do not murder members of your own clan. Kind of in that way that, like, the conventional understanding of thou shalt not kill is that you just shouldn't kill anyone. But I believe there's some argument somewhere I read. This could be totally apocryphal, so I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in the 10 Commandments. I'm not a theist, I guess. So like, I wouldn't know, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that like it's actually more properly interpreted as thou shalt not murder. So like killing in war is one thing, right? But murdering is something different, according to the Jews was their idea, right? The Israelites. So like, my question is, do they care about that? Do they make a distinction between killing a dwarf from another clan? Because I guess they would have to on some level, because again, and then the inverse to that is that there's the whole myth of Ignon and the volcano, and the dwarves have to work together and they can't go to war. So I think it makes sense. Maybe there are two laws that like kind of conflict. That like one law is almost like a stand your ground. Like if someone attacks you or invades your hold, do everything you can to like defend it, and then one law is like to harm a dwarf is to harm your family. And so there's this like, well, what do you do when a dwarf invades your hold? Maybe that's the answer, because I feel like there should be an implication of inside is all that matters and outside is dangerous. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. Let me see. So we'll write these down. Yes, I want to put down just exactly what Alan wrote. Your own family. But I'm curious about where that line is. And again, I would love to try to twist some of the traditional commandments to make them like show off what dwarves care about more than just don't do bad stuff. A dwarf should never let his forge grow cold. Interesting. No dwarf shall allow the forge to cool. The idea being like, do not murder. Do not stop working, I guess is the question, right? Like, because that feels like more of a societal thing that like they would look upon you with shame for doing that, but I don't know if that would be like encoded in the laws. Yeah, yep, that makes sense. Shadow with family law idea. No dwarf shall bear false witness, but again, shall bear false witness. Sorry, I feel like I'm behind you guys, so I was talking so much about murder. Since harming another dwarf would be inconceivable, how about go the full Asimov robot laws? Not only harming, but through an action, let another action be harmed. Yeah, I think that's too lovey-dovey for the dwarves. I think there's a certain... I think this is true as well, that like I think a lot of, because they're all about defense and endurance, I think it's about like toughen up. Like the laws aren't there to protect you, they're there to control you or to govern you, right? Like Coon should be more strict for that reason. The shape and appearance of the work, expression, creation must reflect its true purpose. Honesty is then an outgrowth of aesthetics. Yeah, that's cool. But I feel like traps and stuff are a big thing in dwarven society, right? Like, you're trying to actively fool your enemy. Yeah, protecting your creations, including your family, is part of the prime directive. I agree with that. Yeah, protect your creation. Defend your family, your works, etc. What are some of their other vices? So like greed we talked about, something about no dwarf shall hoard, or it's like, all dwarves must, I don't know what the wording is exactly, but something about hoarding your wealth, because like that I think, although yeah, that's interesting too. Like, what about, this is getting away from the wording of specific laws, but what about the idea of like, are there laws that are applicable just to certain clans? Like, let's say there's the cooking clan, and they have a secret recipe. What's up, Jose? Clarity reminders. Does Yogg only deform life on proximity, or is Coom fully protected, meaning dwarves have full free will consequence? Well, dwarves have full free will. Everybody has free will. So the idea with Yogg is that Yogg is sealed in the earth, and that Yogg can slowly influence, like, some events by really trying and working and manipulating for years. But Yogg is contained inside a shell of sacristeel, or like this saintly ore that can be forged into sacristeel, which is a metal. So Yogg's power at this time in the world is like pretty limited. It can make monsters, it can do some stuff like that, but it's really not doing a lot. At the end of the Second Age, it caused a bunch of calamities. One of them being the volcano explosion that sparked the Seven Sorrows. But that was like a huge outpouring of its will at that time. Not until it's released at the end of the Third Age does it have like broad global influence. Right now, most people don't really remember that Yogg exists, and it's all very secretive. I liked the idea that a lot of any of the major evils in the world could kind of slowly be worked back to Yogg eventually, but it's all like 17 or 600 degrees, or what is it? It's yeah, 600 degrees of separation, right? It's like you can't really get there. Oh, that's cool. Can Yogg taint certain metals? Yeah, Yogg's done some stuff. I'm gonna plead the fifth on this. We've got one of the players from the campaign is here in the chat. You know who you are, Alan Walton. So I'm not gonna speak too much on that, but Yogg definitely has a small part to play in the campaign, and I'm gonna, yeah. Oh no, that's a great idea. They definitely Yogg does taint certain races, just not the dwarves in this case. Aros, the central continent. That no, Jose, your idea is great. I used it in a different spot. But that's basically the story of the orcs. The orcs, were a sort of hunter-gatherer race that lived in harmony with the gods and the earth. But they happened to be in the area where Yogg's power was the greatest and the veil of earth was the thinnest. And he ravaged Aros with earthquakes it ravaged Aros with earthquakes to try to creep up and slowly influence the orcs over the course of the third age. So that's a thing. No, your idea is totally good. It's just not all the dwarves yet. Okay, so let's talk about this. Protect your creations. So something about hoarding wealth. Hoarding wealth. We got a lot here. Train your apprentice, master, apprentice. Like a master shall honor their apprentice, and an apprentice shall honor their master. That kind of a thing. I think it's the same law. I feel like they're not two different laws. Okay, yeah, Vaughn's idea. So a dwarf might defend her family over another family and protect all dwarves from an outside threat. Yeah. Well, that's cool. I like that shout-outer. Somehow I think the dwarves tell a different tale of the fall of the orcs. One involving lack of virtue. Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's the thing, too. I always feel kind of weird about the orcs. I need the orcs to be bad guys at a certain point, just because you need troops for Yogg. But, like, I'm just tired of generically evil orcs. Like, I wanted to play with the idea of, like, they used to be something else, and it's sort of not their fault that this happened to them. But I feel like the dwarves would not view them charitably. I think like almost nobody does, right? They kind of view it as like being the orcs' fault, or I don't feel like that's what happened. That's not, it's like the orcs didn't like make decisions that led to what happened to them. They ended up being pushed into a corner where they basically had no choice. Yeah, we'll talk about orcs another day. That's actually one of the topics when we talk about elves and we talk about other races. And besides, that's all hundreds of years, thousands of years from now. Let's not worry about the Yogg stuff. Vandalism. It goes against maining. Yeah. I think it is definitely, like, I wonder if vandalism is... that's cool. Yeah. Sacred Steel is also only mined by one of the clans. That's Clan Deepvein. Because it's the deepest, obviously. And it's the hardest. Because it's so hard, it's almost impossible to mine. So it's very, 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 very difficult. But yeah, that's cool. I like that. That like there's some benefit to it. There's like it's thicker over there or something like that. That maybe it's not evenly distributed. Vandalism is very bad. A terrible crime. Yep. I think. Yeah, I think the I don't know if there's a separate. Alan's point is very important. I don't think there's a separate law that specifically includes kings and thanes. I think it's just all dwarves and no dwarves. So it's like if you call yourself a dwarf, then it applies to you, and the judge shows up, and there's gotta be, I don't have one in my history. I gotta find one. There's gotta be a king or multiple kings, right, who like were charged on some crime. A king whose uh, who failed the trial by combat and was sentenced. I love that. Yeah, that like the example of like, just because you're in power does not mean that you're above the law. Destroying creation, yeah, like vandalism / destroying a creation. I do think it's like largely unheard of, but I could also see it being like a terrible profanation, like kind of like the way that we think of like sexual assault or something like that in our society. If you think of creation as being akin to sex for dwarves, right? Like this thing that like drives and dominates their whole society, that destroying a creation or vandalizing someone else's creation would be like this is like the crime. It's like the worst crime, right? And I don't think that like I don't think that the judges make a distinction about that. I think the judges, like, they're all equally bad. Like, I don't know if there's like maybe there's a hierarchy. What do you guys think? Is there like a hierarchy of like this is the, because that's kind of interesting that like I guess we have that in the United States, right? Where it's like murder is the worst and multiple murders are worse than a single murder. But the idea of the Ten Commandments, I mean, I guess the Ten Commandments are also numbered. It's the first commandment, the second commandment. But the idea of like this is the worst one, this is the second one, because that might show you what they care about in what order. What do you guys think? Do you think a hierarchy is cool? Or because my instinct is that like all the laws are equally valid, right? And the judge shows up and pronounces you guilty or not guilty, and then it's like the aggrieved party's determination as to what they should have to do, or the thane or whatever, like they're the ones who actually mete out the punishment because the judge just pronounces guilt or whatever. So yeah, there's something interesting about them not caring about the judge not caring about the severity of the crime and just saying guilt or innocence, and just those are the two things the judge cares about. But then societally, that vandalism is really, really bad. That like the dwarves think of it as being the worst crime, and then that's why the punishments are bad, because they're dictated by the dwarves. The judges are just binary; they don't care, right? I don't know. I think that's interesting. I think the society one is better because it feels like then it's about humans making human decisions, and like, yeah. That's cool, Alan. Yeah, because that's kind of what I was imagining in the back of my head, where like the judges in the Old Testament, running around kicking ass, were all people empowered by God during a time when bad kings or moral chaos, of bad kings and moral chaos throughout Israel. Could be judges were a late amendment to the divine judiciary. Judge takes a tablet with a commandment being broken and weighs it against. Oh, that's kind of a huge scale, like a gargantuan scale. I like the idea of them having a commandment like with the tablet, though. That's neat. It has a very the scale has a very Anubis and Amit, like weighing your heart against a feather thing, which is kind of neat. Yeah. Beard regulations. Is that a law? Because I can't decide if that's a law or a custom. I do like that, though. Like, why did they come about? So we don't really have like a bad king in the history except for Karu. There's like lazy kings or like poor kings, but there's no like actually bad king besides Karuj, I mean, yeah, I can move stuff around, but like I do like that idea of them like arising, of the history, like why did they make this pact? That's cool. So dwarven writing is weird. Everything's weird about them, but I think the idea of the Holy Scripture is neat. Like again, it's the armor, right? Man, is it too much to say that there are 7 commandments? Because then you can have like the one judge who shows up, like the one judge who shows up in oh, he's struck out of every mention. That's interesting. So dwarven writing has two forms. There's a pictographic form, which is like um, what was I gonna say? It's like if you look at Mayan script, where it's got this the the jaguar head and the paw and whatever. Like I went to a museum that had a Mayan exhibit, and the writing is fascinating, and it's totally different from a lot of other styles of writing from that time period. So it was really based on that. And then a short way into their like recorded history, they invent a runic alphabet. One of the queens does, to sort of trade with humans, because they previously had not really had it, and it made it very difficult. It could be a golem. Yeah, I like the idea that it was a spirit or an undead creature more, because it ties it to the necropolis, and it ties it to like a dwarf making a decision. But golems are cool. I'm not opposed to it. I think they're spookier if they're undead, and then their powers are less understandable. If it's like a golem, then you could look at it and say like, I understand how it works. You could kind of take it apart. You could do a thing where, like, rather than it being armor, it's like a dwarven spirit occupying a golem or something like that. So it isn't just like an arcane creation. No, I think it's cool. It's not that I'm not excited by it. I'm weighing it. I think they're both good, And golems are tricky because yeah, they definitely have a robot thing. I think golems are cool. I want a place for golems in dwarven society, because you're exactly right. Like they you don't. It's just armor. I think it's just the armor, and then there's like wispy shit that animates it. They're animate suits of armor, and that's it. Maybe they have masks or something like that, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's essentially what I'm thinking, Jose. It's like a dwarf offered their soul to animate the suit of armor. It's not that I'm not excited about the idea, Vaughn. I do think it's a good idea, because I have not figured out my golems yet, and I think golems would have an important role in dwarven society beyond just I'm a rock guy. Oh, is it? I didn't get that far. Well, then maybe it's better to have them be armor to separate that. But I do want golems to be a part of Coom, and I do want golems to be a part of dwarven society, because again, it's a very dwarven idea of like that's how they would create life in a certain sense. So no, it is a good idea, and I'm weighing it because they're both cool. We got to figure out golems too. So okay, going back to what I was saying, if there are 7 commandments, oh yeah, I didn't play the DLC. If there are 7 commandments, then it feels like they need to. What I like about that is that then there could be one judge per commandment. So it's like if you imagine like the 7 deadly sins or something like that. Like imagine if you you break the commandment of wrath or whatever, and then the judge Wrath shows up, right? It's like which crime you committed based on which judge shows up. But there is something also, yeah, I think that's kind of neat. And it keeps it relatively short, because I think you could go into a lot of stuff about like, yes, that's kind of what I think is cool, right? If there are 7 commandments, then there's 7 judges. So and again, this is maybe boiling it down too far, but like there are also 7 vice. There are also 4 virtues, and what if 2 crimes of the same sin are committed simultaneously? Do 2 judges show up? I mean, ostensibly, I guess that's kind of a cool plot. I don't know. Yeah, you may be right, Jose. Maybe it's better if they're not. I can't decide, because I like, obviously I like limitations and borders, and I like synergies, right? Like I like, because that makes it feel very planned. That like we said there would be 7 laws, and then you end up with situations where there are no laws for situations that come up. Like I like the idea that there's like one law that's basically useless now. And there's like one judge that like almost never goes out because that law is almost never broken, right? It's the thou shalt not, like the government can't quarter soldiers in your house. It's like there's one judge that basically never sees the light of day, and then there's one judge that's constantly going around all the time because that's the law that's constantly being broken. Is interesting. To tariffs and embargoes. So that's what I'm saying, right? Is that like Because you could easily come up with 50 laws, right? But I feel like that's not the way they work. And I like the idea that the dwarves said, these are the laws. They're the best laws and we'll never need any more. And then obviously they needed more, or they needed, like, you know, different things. Like, I feel like there should be at least one, like, glaring, like, shit, we did not come up with a law for this thing. You know, and it's like societal pressure that keeps people from doing it, but there is actually no law against it. Or there's no, like, to eat certain rocks is bad. Yeah, that feels very Deuteronomous or whatever. It's that, like, or Leviticus. It feels like that thing of, like, you know, don't fuck a camel. Or now it just seems like, okay, who would want to do that? But they needed it back then in the desert. Like, don't have sex with a baboon. I think there's a Louis C.K. joke about that, about how the reason that the Bible, like, exists and was useful back then was because people were, like, fucking camels and stuff. And it's like, come on, guys. They're, like, trying to make a society. But yeah, I like the idea of, like, a judge that the law is just, like, completely unnecessary now. So, useless law. Yes, totally. It's exactly what I want, Vaughn. I want, how do you advance a society with these out-of-date laws? And they refuse, and like, not if they refuse to, but that, like, I think then the Thanes have to adjudicate a lot of those things. They can't call them laws because they're not laws, but there are these norms and these customs, and the Thane can kind of, like, if someone comes to them with a squabble and says blah, 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 the Thane can rule on it, but it's not technically a law. And so the, like, society is kind of hobbled because it can't advance, it can't modernize, right? So yeah, I want a useless law. I want, like, an abused law, a law that's constantly being broken all the time. And I want, like a missing law. Like, there's a thing that, like, needs to be illegal in Dwarven society, but it is not one of the 7 laws. So either Thanes and Kings are constantly adjudicating it, or, like, that crime is just being committed all over the place, right? And obviously it can't be something like murder, but that, you know, that's what I mean. So options for useless law, like, do not eat certain rocks is, like, a silly one, but it could work, right? It conveys that idea of, like, this was a thing that people were doing back in the day and now they don't anymore. Another option is something about, like, no dwarf shall allow their metal to rust. So we had this idea a long time ago that the honor of the oath. Oh yeah, the oath is important. Oath swearing. No cussing. No cussing is interesting. Profanity. But I feel like, can you imagine if it was something like that? Yeah, that's not a bad idea, Vaughn, basically. So oaths are super important to dwarves too. There's a cultural thing with them getting tattoos whenever they get an oath. So if you see a dwarf with a tattoo, it probably means that they have sworn some kind of an oath, and it's there to remind them either of their responsibility, and if they do it right. Oh, frack. It's funny. Shows up with a cuss jar. You have to put in a gold piece because you said a bad word. Can you imagine how often that judge would, he just, like, holds it out and you put the thing in, and, like, because they're a ghost, they're just always there in every scene, they're just, like, holding it and waiting. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so one thing we had talked about a long time ago was that there was a period when that, like, you know, to a certain point in the dwarves' history, metal rusts. That's what happens, right? If it's not kept up. And that wasn't too specific, but it's something like this. And there was, like, a plague of rust monsters at one point in their history. I think Alan described it as the Rust Bowl. Like, this horrible thing swept through, and it rusted a bunch of metals, and it caused a bunch of problems for the dwarves. It was like a 5 to 10 year period of, like, oh god, the rust. On child labor protections. Interesting. And then they found a cure, basically, and they found like a chemical they can put in their metals to prevent them ever from rusting ever again, right? So the idea of there being a judge associated with you know, rust or something like that. This thing that has just never happened anymore, right? Missing, so yeah, child labor protection. Child labor is pretty dark. Oh, the Oathsworn for city defense. Their craft is combat, not creation. Yeah, exactly. Environmental protections. I feel like they would have environmental protections, but I guess maybe not. That would be very important to them theologically, because the earth is ignon, right? But maybe they don't. Again, if you're only going to have 7. Okay, let's do this. I don't know if this is exactly what I want to do, because I'm worried that this will shackle me. Ooh, finance is a great example. Finance is perfect, because it shows that they don't ghost hosts. That's funny. I think there's a game. I think there's a role-playing game called Ghost Court, where you you have to you need to have like 5 to 10 people to play it, but it's like you do a mock trial for a dead person. If this person was killed and or they have some undead grievance, and there's the a bunch of people play the gallery, and their joke is that they're supposed to woo. It could be about ferrofluid. So the ferrofluid is one of the 7 rare substances that the different elder clans have. So there could be one about those different substances. Possessing a vessel. Oh yeah, that's neat. I don't know if they boo, ah, and stuff, but I love the idea of true sight and what they would look like. Yeah, that's cool. I'll put that on the list. What does a judge look like? A ghostly host surrounds them. I mean, this is pretty weird. The souls of everyone they ever condemn. Is there a crime that prevents you from going to heaven? Yeah, any law against greed is toothless and arcane. It's only about stealing finished goods or something, not the means of purchase or manufacture. Yeah. I think Alan's on it with finance, because that touches into their disdain for trade, and if these laws were invented before the advent of humans, banishment from a family might fit the bill. Oh, for breaking the law? Oh, yeah. Maybe. So we talked about heaven in a previous adventure, I think in the last stream. The idea is that Asgard or Valhalla or whatever you call it is not a celestial location. It is like a hidden door on the Mountain of the Dead, which is like the necropolis. I don't know if that's the name of it, but that's the necropolis where all the dwarves are interred. And so the idea is that they live in Coombe, the gods do, but their hall is so well hidden no one has ever found it, and that when you die, you your soul is interred, your body is interred under the mountain, and then your soul can go and the Hall of Remembrance or whatever we end up calling it can go to can find its way there, right? Only as a spirit, only as a ghost. So maybe if you're not interred properly, then you can't make it there. That's interesting. I just like the idea of the judges being surrounded by the souls of the people that they had condemned or something that adds some spookiness to it. But we can get there. I think Alan is on the money with the finance. I think it's this one. I could be wrong. We could have a different one, but the original law, I really like the way you phrased it, is arcane and the other ghosts. That's interesting. The way that banishment works in Coombe is that there's a holiday called Last Lock. It's really like a conga line. Yeah, that's cool. I like that, Vaughn. Is that there's a holiday called Last Lock where if you are not home on the day of the holiday, then you don't learn the new passwords and stuff, and you're functionally exiled from the clan. I wonder if exile, because exile also feels like a potentially good punishment. I like Shadowrunner's idea of a shave too, as being another potential punishment. So like, let's make a list of punishments. So hard labor, particularly useless labor, or labor that benefits another clan, especially if it's like an inter-clan thing. Banishment, extremely severe. You can be banished for like a time, for a time. Like short-term banishment could be a thing, right? For short-term, long-term, and permanent. I like the idea of permanent, of banishment, that like long-term banishment is basically the rest of your life, but then you can come back, like, you know, to finish your masterwork or whatever. So that way when you die, you're still interred. So like you are long-term banished, you can never come back, but you don't have to wander endlessly. And then permanent banishment means you do not go back to the halls. You don't go to heaven, essentially. And then I think shaving is like a disgrace. Like a minor infraction. Essentially. Oh, I think like a fine would exist too. Like they they take a creation and they scrap it for parts. Maybe that's too much, even for dwarves. Yeah, funny, Alan and I, we got there at the same time, having your work seized, melted down, parted down. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe the banishment, permanent banishment. They give the creation to another, could be. They give it away. Like maybe it's like a civil forfeiture thing. Yeah, isn't that bad? I thought about that too. Oh yeah, you could be demoted. Oh yeah, demotion. Remove your master, like hood, like your mastership. Right, that like if you've achieved the rank of master, apology letter. I'm so sorry, you guys. Remove your mastership or thanedom or crown. Right, like you can be taken out of your position of power. The iron price, yeah. That's cool. Oh wait, where did this go? Oh, this should be a new category. There we go. That's cool. This is a good stream, you guys. I have some really good ideas. I like the iron price. Called the iron price. I guess that's Game of Thrones, but I think it's cool. You're the human greeter. Hello. Hi. Welcome to the hold. Yeah, you got to deal with humans, or you become a merchant or something like that. Yeah. The original. I want to talk about this missing law for a second. The original law is arcane and toothless. It only concerns. How did Alan phrase it? I'm gonna roll back up. Finance. Yeah. It's only about. It only concerns stealing finished goods, not the means of purchase or manufacture. Yeah, like white collar crime, you know. Depends on the nature of the creation. Brewers losing their old cask isn't likely to be used by others, but definitely forfeited out to the aggrieved of the city. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I think a big thing with the punishment too. Oh yeah, no, there's no laws. I think the finance stuff is what's fascinating because that's like it isn't just like one thing like theft. It's like a huge umbrella that would screw their economy basically, right? That like, and I think that the economy we've talked about it before that there's some kind of socialistic elements that like all the dwarves work for a time in the mines, and then they get a yield, and then some portion of that yield is sent to the Thane for taxes, or some portion of that is sent to the Elder Clan for taxes, and then some portion of that is given to the clan to rebuild stuff, and then the rest of it it's like meted out depending on how many hours or whatever you put into the mine. So if you want more stuff, you got to work more, and you get a certain amount of credits, and it's like, okay, you can have X amount of granites, you can have 10 granites, or you could have 5 silver, or you could have like 1 lapis lazuli or whatever. So the idea of, but then that's their economy, right? So is that I think that's all like bylaw stuff that applies to individual clans, like what the percentage is and that kind of stuff. That's all local law. That's not, I mean, you got to think of the judges as like federal law, right? But I still think you could be legally inside the like Thane law or the Hold's laws, again, the Hold's customs, how the Hold works, and still break a federal crime. Especially if the federal crimes are stuff like, do not covet, that kind of a thing. Whether they meet their first loan shark? Yeah, I don't know. All kinds of financial crimes are essentially uncovered by the judges. Okay, we have about 20 minutes. I want to try to get just like a draft of the 7, or whichever ones we're going to do. So what are our vices? What are our virtues? So virtue, so we have creation as a virtue, and we have creation is a virtue, and we have defense is a virtue, and history is a virtue, and family is a virtue. We may not actually have 7, and now I think it's like, what's the useless one, right? Let me get this out of here. Vices include greed is a vice, and suspicion is a vice, and trade is a vice. So what do we have? Do any of these work for any of those? Paying attention to the work of others feels like a greed thing. Let's just throw them under these different umbrellas. You can tell, yeah, that's true. Again, this might not work. I just wanted to test it. Dwarves, yeah, secrecy. That's under defense. This one seems like harm or family. Yeah, I wonder. And that makes sense to me on some level. Well, the forged to cool is a creation one. A dwarf shall bear false witness. I'm not sure about suspicion, I guess. It just seems like they don't really care about... I guess they care about Yeah, it's kind of a history thing, because they only care about what happened in truth. Protect your creations. Yeah, you can't reveal the Wu-Tang secret, dog. Oh, that's defense. Not creation. Something about hoarding wealth is definitely greed. Master and apprentice is... I don't know about master and apprentice. It feels like family, but I think it might be creation. Beard regulations, I don't know either. And yeah. No, the fried chicken roast. Yeah, family history. Social stuff feels like family. Yeah, that's true. I don't know if this is gonna work because I think beard is history. It could be. This is a very messy document. Oath swearing. We talked about up here. We talk about suspicion has feuds in it. I don't know. They don't really care about honor in the traditional sense. They care about their word, right? Because they care about oaths. I don't know. These are all good, but I don't know if my like let's group them into categories thing really works. Because you get some that have too many, right? And you get some that like, I'll put it under history, I think, for oath swearing. Trade has nothing, but I think that's the point, right? Is that we wanted a useless law, we wanted a missing law. So that still only leaves us with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I don't know about beard regulation, because beard regulations to me feel like the useless one, but I think yeah, that's fair. Honor is all of them. It's like, what does a dwarf consider to be honorable? Yeah. I think maybe beard regulations is the useless one. Only pertain to individuals. When the bright shards city. I love that. Yeah, you're all about the bright shards, and they're like corporate crime. Yeah, because it's like no dwarf shall, no dwarf shall. That's cool. It's like Citizens United, you know, for dwarves. All laws pertain to individuals. Yeah, savings and loans. Right Shard Mutual. Yeah, that's funny. So let's see. If we had to distill creation, right, down to one thing, like creation's hard, right? But like, if there was one thing that like what is the law for creation, right? Like defense seems pretty obvious. Defense is protect your creations, essentially, right? Respect your works, maybe. But again, it's like that's so vague. I mean, I guess is that the point? Is the point that they like? I've talked about this a little bit. We never settled on it. Is the point that they are so open to interpretation, right? That like it's kind of up to the judges whether or not they enforce them, you know? Because like let's say it's respect your works, right? Respect your works. That's the law. Like all dwarves shall respect their work or whatever. Again, just as for example, you know, let's say that you take a day off. You're supposed to work on your thing today, but you get lazy or you get busy and you don't do it. And then a judge shows up 3 days later because you took a day off. You know, like if it's that vague, is that what we're talking about? You know, it's about not making substandard work. A dwarf shall, a shell company shall. Different like work safety. Work safety. That's a good point, actually. I didn't think about the like. Maybe they have like fire resistant beard oils and stuff. You know. Something like respect your works. Because like, what does that mean in that context? It's like so. Again, I think it's good because it's broad, but I'm worried that it's like so vague. You know. Beard apron. Safety can be defense. Yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe they have like, maybe we go deeper. I think trying to encapsulate all a dwarf legally feels about creations is too much in one sentence. So maybe it's like all the laws apply to one of the 7 and there's like, or one of the 6 or something like that. And there's 3 of them per or whatever. And again, we don't have to work inside this framework. If this framework is being limiting, which I think it feels like it is right now, then we don't have to do it. But like, I was just trying to think of I like the idea of there being like a very short, limited number of laws that they try to interpret. But again, let's maybe start with one that we know or we feel comfortable with. So we know that the greed one is about individuals, and we know that it's about like, like stealing somebody else's work, but it's not about like hoarding wealth, right? See, it feels like the thing that they're talking about. So like hoarding wealth. Let's try to come up with 3 maybe. So hoarding wealth, stealing from others, and then something about like jealousy or envy, right? Defense is definitely like protect your creations is one, right? Like I think something about secrecy, but I feel like because like protect your creations, the problem with protect your creations is that like how do you break that law? Like you break it by like what's an example of a dwarf breaking protect your creations? Defense is prudence too. Yeah. Hoarding wealth, stealing from others. I wonder if stealing could be like framed in such a way that it also includes falsely claiming another's creation as your own. Like stealing / plagiarism, right? Or like maybe it's theft and then plagiarism. Yeah, because like, do we want any that are... I think it would be cool if there's at least one that's like abstract and it's about like emotions. Because then you can get that thought police thing. That's an interesting arc of like... unless their stuff gets shabby through neglect. But that's what I mean, is that like, do you want a judge showing up for that? Like... because I think there's a difference between breaking a law and being a bad dwarf. Does that make sense? Like, because I like the idea, like one thing that I think is cool about protect your creations, or something, again, whatever the phrasing is that it puts the onus on you as the protector, not on the person who would damage or steal your stuff, That it's like, it's your job. Again, going back to like the old myth of Umbor and Hemdall, that like it's not the thief's fault that the thief stole something, it's the vault's. And that's what I mean, Alan, right? Is a dwarf who loses a battle breaks the law, and like that seems like overkill. That seems like if you just get defeated in battle, if you lose a fight, then suddenly this judge shows up. Like that just, I mean, there's something kind of cool about that. Like it's this insult to injury thing, but I feel like that's the problem, is that it creates this like double jeopardy scenario where not only did you lose the battle, but then you also are visited by a judge because you failed to protect it. So maybe it has to be the other way around. Maybe it has to be laws that specifically target like the aggressor. Yeah. It is victim blaming. It definitely is. But again, I wonder, is that culturally interesting to say, right? Is it interesting to say that the culture favors, loss as a motivator to get better? So it shouldn't, So are you saying, Shadowrunner, that it should, like, I just don't think they should be punished, because they have been punished. I think that like you would view a loss in battle as punishment from the gods. So a clan can never be dishonored, only its leadership. Then that's what I mean, is that like, if they're in battle, does the judge come to every single dwarven warrior? Like, let's say that there's a dwarven phalanx, and one guy stumbles and it opens the phalanx and then the enemy pours in. Does that guy get visited by a judge because he didn't protect his creations? Or is it just the leadership? I don't know. I think that's what's tricky about it. Well, right, but trial by combat is only done against a judge. The trial by combat is the judge has the hammer, right, and destroys the shield. Oh, that's cool, Vaughn. I like that. I'm pondering a creation law. Not judge worthy if you desert your post. Yeah, I kind of agree. That's cool, Alan. Okay, let's talk about these. I'm pondering a creation law based on the be fruitful and multiply idea. Be industrious and create. So that's cool. I like that. Let me write that down. Be industrious. Industrious and create. And create. So what is an example of a dwarf breaking that law? Because again, that feels like a cultural idea. Not that the dwarves can't express that in the legal system, but like, again, I mean, you got to think about this as like, what is a law and what function does it serve in society? Like, laws are all about wrongdoing, right? They're not necessarily about like aspirational values, you know? So like, if you don't follow that law, then someone who doesn't make something, is there a time frame, you know? Is it like if you just didn't make something today? Because again, I like that. I think that makes sense that's what they would like value, but I worry that like we're approaching this backwards, that we're looking at like what are the laws should almost only pertain to the vices because that's what the laws are there to do. They're there to protect against bad behavior. Poor spinsters. Oh, you're talking about like families? Oh, that seems crazy. I feel like that, yeah. I think, okay, we're running out of time, but let's look at the Ten Commandments. Working while sick. So, like, those are interesting. Yeah, I don't know if it's too dark. I just feel like it's limiting in not a fun way, you know? I think we got to look at these commands, because, like, look at this. Not is in, like, half of these motherfuckers, right? It's all about what you're not supposed to do, not what, like, there's only, like, 2 of them that are quote-unquote positive. Like, keep the Sabbath holy and honor thy mother and father are the only 2 of the 10 that don't have the word not in it in some capacity. Like, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have strange gods before me, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord God in vain, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. I think the laws have to be specifically things you can't do. So, like, rather than saying be industrious, it's like don't be slothful, right? Don't be lazy, you know? Happened before and therefore are banned. Exactly. It's like they have like the crimes have names. Adultery, like they have a name for the crime, you know? So I think by going about it by saying like these are the things dwarves value, and that wouldn't be encoded in their laws, that would be encoded in their society and the way they act. They wouldn't need the judges to enforce that stuff. I mean, if we want to, if we want to say that like productivity is really important to dwarves, so much so that, you know, laziness is punished, then we can have a law that says like, you know, thou shalt not be lazy or thou shalt not be slothful. But a law that says thou must be industrious or thou must, you know, protect someone or whatever, like it's just setting it up for failure, you know. So yeah, something like that. That might be a way to do it. I mean, that's the question. What's interesting about thou shalt not allow the forge to cool, no dwarf shall allow the forge to cool, is that, like, this is a side tangent, but, like, is that literal? Is it only forges? You know, is that, like, yeah, exactly. I think it would, like, conventionally extend to other crafts. But do the judges care about that? Or do the judges just literally enforce what the actual, like, is it a legalistic, literalist read of it, you know? I think it's got to be knots, you know? I think it's got to be, like, So, okay. So I think we got to break the virtue vice thing. That was my idea. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's like putting us in this weird rubric that doesn't make any sense. Ye dwarf shall not. It does do that. That is interesting. The literalness does make the out of touch element there. So I think we got to break the rubric. I think a lot of your ideas, guys, are still good and usable. I just don't think trying to group it under the vices and virtues, I think that's a bad idea. I think no dwarf shall allow their forge to cool. Because then it feels like, again, trying to think of like scenarios into which the dwarves would, like the judges would arrive. So Coombe has been like basically inactive for, you know, any forge. Well, no. The thing is that then you could say that like, if no dwarf shall allow any forge to cool, then like if I'm over here working on my forge, you know, and a dwarf in another hold halfway across the world, right? Their forge goes out. Now I'm on the hook for that guy. Like, I think it's interesting, Jose. I'm just trying to figure out, like, if they're literalists, you know, where does that put us? Maybe they're not literalists in that way, because I think if they're able to interpret it, yeah, they do govern the individual. That's true. Yeah, any forge in sight. Creation is the absent one because any punishment involves destruction, which is anathema to creation. That's kind of interesting. If we did do 7 judges. Because you could do, if you did want to group them, it's like laws against creation and laws against defense and laws against history and laws against family and laws against vice. And you know what I mean? Like, you could do it that way. Yeah, Alan, you're right. The laws just govern the individual. No dwarf shall allow any forge to cool. Necessary for the forges. The forges are necessary for the metal work, from ingots and barrel hoops to warrior weapons, as do the sculptors. Yeah, this is a tough one. We might have to come back. We might have to do laws part 2. Yeah. I go with any wrongfulness that is not done by the wrongdoer. Corruption of creation. I love how there could be really officious and self-righteous dwarves who are coming and snooping around my forge, making it their business whether it's hot enough. Yeah. I mean, I do like something. I think there's something about this. I think there is what I want, but like, I think something like, what I like about this as a law, like let's say we pick this as one of them, that I can see there being like paragraphs describing exactly like, oh, because like, what about jurisprudence, right? Isn't that the term, or is it precedent? What about like, okay, this is kind of cool. So jurisprudence could be huge for dwarves, if I'm getting that term right. I could be wrong. But the concept, right, of like what previous cases, how the judges have ruled in previous cases. So there had to have been a period, right after the judges were established, where these are the rules, right? And the dwarves are like alarmed in a lot of cases about when the judges show up. And the dwarves are doing whatever they're doing. And the judges are like, you broke one of the laws. And the dwarf is like, what the fuck are you talking about? And the judge is like, you let your forge die. Right? And then the dwarf is like, hey, that's not my fault. Is it just precedence? I always thought it was jurisprudence. Maybe that's a different thing. Just precedence then, cool. Like, then the judge is like, the dwarf says in their defense, they say like, well, we ran out of wood. That's why the forge died. We ran out of wood. It's not my fault. And then the judge like rules on the case and says, because there was no wood, it's not the dwarf's fault, and the judge leaves. And so it's been thousands of years of the dwarves figuring out like what's allowable and what's not allowable, right? And only the judges know, right? Precedence is a prior ruling, yeah. What does jurisprudence mean? Yeah, it's Stone Bones versus Iron Guy. But I think that's a big. I think that like the judges have the correct interpretation in their head, and it took the dwarves a long time to figure out exactly what the laws mean. So I think that like they were, because I don't know if the dwarves wrote them. Maybe the gods wrote them, and so it's been this like slow process of like determining when they say any forge to cool is when something has been ruled before some. See, that's what I thought. I thought jurisprudence was like, and this is beside the point, we're wasting time. Jurisprudence. Oh, you're right, it's the theory or philosophy of law. Okay, I'm wrong. I thought it was, yeah, precedence. I'm a silly boy. But like, I like the idea that, yeah, it's like the law is something, kind of figurative, like no dwarf shall allow any forge to cool. Right. Like if 5 consecutive times any judge has ruled for a certain copyright, then it's jurisprudence. I see. If if the law is no dwarf shall allow any forge to cool or their forge to cool. I'm so confused. Hello, my name is Jurisprudence. Have you been injured at the workplace? Jurisprudence works for HR, yeah. I guess it would be DR, it'd be Dwarf Resources. I don't know. I don't know what jurisprudence is. I don't understand. I'll look it up later. My point is that it would be about like what the dwarves had like deciphered about the judge's rulings based on previous cases. So if all of the words in stone are vague like this, rather than being really specific, then you can have like texts about them. There's like a book or something like that. There's like, this is all that we've learned about the fourth commandment, and we've learned that, yeah, as you say, Shadow, it's about loopholes. It's like we've learned that, if there's no wood in the hold, then it's not their fault that the forge goes dry. We've learned, or that goes cold, and we've learned that like it doesn't just apply to a forge. It applies to other things, That does make it seem like big and like organic in a way that's like not exactly what I wanted, but I do like it being kind of mysterious, and it's like the kind of thing you could, like the Ten Commandments, you could like really easily memorize. So I don't think we're gonna get to them all tonight. I think I'm gonna have to go in a minute here, but I think we got to do part 2. Because I want to figure out what these are. We have a lot of good ideas, and we've really talked this through, and I have a much better understanding of the legal system now. But, okay, let me write that idea down. Precedence is huge for the dwarven judges. Precedence is huge for dwarven judges. When they were first established, it was unclear how they would interpret certain laws when, as they ruled on more and more cases, the correct interpretation I mean, yeah, I even like the idea, like, let's say that no dwarf shall allow any forge to cool is one of the laws, right? And it's meant to say no dwarf shall stop working, right? And honestly, no dwarf shall stop working is kind of a better one. But whatever. There's something kind of artistic about no dwarf shall allow any forge to cool. So let's go back to our previous extremely simple example. The judge shows up. The dwarf is like, it's not my fault. The wood is gone. And then the judge goes to the Thane and says, why is there no wood? And like, because the Thane or whoever, the peer council, whoever it is, proved unworthy or proved unable to supply the clan with wood, they're the ones at fault, not the individual dwarves, right? Like whoever is in charge of it. So it could be that kind of a thing too, right? If you want to talk about like the Thane is more likely to attract the notice of the judge than somebody else, right? That's like a hierarchy thing. The lower you are on sort of the clan totem pole, the less likely you are to be considered at fault for a crime, because probably you were a victim of something. Yeah, War in the Woodlands, right? Okay. So it's complicated, is what we've discovered. It's cool to have this kind of supernatural, semi-divine source of law. This is a really messy document, but that means that it doesn't. Interpretations of Holy Scripture. Yeah, I think so. And I like that allows for like debate and like, again, thinking of the Talmud, it was one of my original like conceit, the idea of like a rabbinic scholar who has studied the laws and knows the laws and has studied the context into which the laws were written and the history. So the reason this law was around was because of this. This was what was happening at the time when the law was written. And so that's why it is interpreted in this way. And that may seem archaic or obscure to us, but then this is how you get out of it. It's how you manipulate it. This is how you understand the law. That's really interesting, Alan. I wonder how much of their like, ooh, Alan is so good. Those are great. 2 judges arrive for the same crime. Historical case when all 7 judges were summoned for one clusterfuck. Like, why would that happen? I wonder if, like, is it 2 crimes or is it like multiple? Yeah, that's like, that feels like you guys ever played the game Fiasco, right? It feels like there would have had to have been. Yeah, there you go. That's good. There would have had to have been like a huge kerfuffle, right? Like, yeah, like a civil war. There is a civil war. Ooh, connected to the Civil War. I think it is part of it. I think it has to be. I think interpretation is like a natural outgrowth of it. And I think that means you get dwarves who are literalists. Dwarves who say this is how it's meant to be done. And there you get dwarves who say, well, that's impossible. I think that the dwarven virtue is that it's rigid, but I think that it has to be more flexible than they want it to be. I definitely hear you, Jose. Like, that is supposed to be dwarves. But I think the point is that, like, this is the law. No dwarf shall allow any forge to cool, or whatever we end up making it. But let's say that's it. And that's rigid because that's the wording of it. But yeah, I love that. I don't know if there's a civil war about it, but I think I think something that happened in the Civil War could have sparked that. Although, maybe there was a civil war about a law. That seems neat. There's like a war of succession at one point where one of the non-true silvers, one clan, like Dunya Dragonbane, a famous dwarven queen, like appoints as her successor a member of a minor house, clan Basherhorn, I think, and then they end up like, it's like there's a period where a clan who's not true silver is king for a couple of rulers, and that causes a civil war. Yeah, and I think that's the point, is it's meant to be a schism. It's meant to not work great, and so therefore breed kind of different interpretations and stuff like that. Yeah, I think we got to do part 2. Maybe not next week, because I think I promised elves for next week, but I'll put it on the list after that. Okay, great. I think we're going to stop there because I think I'm over my time. But this has been a really, really good... Ooh, Mithril strong and flexible. Adamantine is more rigid. That's a great way to think of it. Even more flexible than Mithril is ferrofluid, chat owner. Yeah, I think we're going to call it. But this has been a really great stream. It's been fascinating to talk about this stuff with you guys. These are my favorite ones. Like, it's obviously cool to say, like, what kind of monsters live there? Or, like, what's a cool volcano? But to, like, dig into the nuts and bolts of, like, this society, that's the stuff that's really fun for me. I think elves will be fun in a similar way because we'll get to talk about specifically this, like, weird offshoot of elven society. Yeah. I think that's cool. The 2 sects of law interpretation, flexible versus rigid. Yeah, I dig it. We didn't get into customs at all, but that's okay. There's a bunch more customs that occurred to me I should make a note of. This is a good stream, you guys. Thanks for coming and talking. We will be back next week with another one. I will have to check the time on that because I haven't actually reserved the space. But thanks everybody for coming out. Oh, I didn't even realize you guys couldn't read the whole thing. Oh my gosh. Has it been like that the whole time? No. Is that better? Oh man, that sucks. Great, yeah. So we will be back next week with another stream, and I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be elves. Great, it'll be a nice, refreshing change of pace from all the dwarves. Thanks everybody for coming and tuning in, and I will see you all hopefully next Sunday. Until then, keep it real, beardos.